The rattle begins before the bell, a wooden jaw chattering itself brave as iron rims find every stone you have ever failed to sweep from the lane. You could name the cart by sound now if you had the stomach for poetry. Clatter, sigh, thud, a harness creak like an old prayer. The men walking beside it, two bearers with vinegar rags tied at the mouth, a beadle with his tally book, a searcher with her rod. Do not look at your window, because work improves by being unobserved. The driver clucks to a horse that understands death as weight and not as drama. The cart halts where the alderman's order says it must, under the carved lintel with chalk crosses layered like argument. You open the door because you set the rule yourself. When the bell calls, you answer with your hands. Leather ties on your sleeves, rope on your wrist. The cart waits with a patience that lives on other people's decisions. Before we grip the staves and lift what the city has decided you will lift, do two small things that keep this project alive like a bucket line. Subscribe and tap the bell. We add a fresh corridor every day. And in the comments, tell me the 3 items you'd carry if you had to walk behind a dead cart at dusk. Vinegar rag, cord, staff, tally chalk, lantern with horn, shovel. Searchers knock first because the law prefers women who can afford to be right. She carries the rod that says she may count the living and name the dead. She dips it into the vinegar jar and touches it to the brow, the wrist, the empty air above the linen. She takes the tale. How many in the house? How many in the pit this week? How many beds left that are not yet arguments? She marks the door with a cross and a date. First one for suspicion, second for certainty, third when pity tries to be policy. You wish the chalk would fade faster. It does not. Inside the beadle counts spoons because spoons say more about survival than big words do. He writes a line in the parish book that will become a dot in the bill of mortality, a dot that will become a number someone in a counting house will use to decide whether foreign merchants may dock by Michaelmas. The cart waits. The bearers are not saints. They are men you have nodded to in markets and disliked in taverns. Vinegar tied at the nose because vinegar is what you can afford to believe in. Cord around their waists because rope ends arguments. Staves slung on their shoulders because weight likes boards. They lift in the way you agreed at the last ward mote, not with hands under shroud that can betray you, but with hooks through the cloth and staves under the hooks, so linen and wood bear what flesh should not. Straw in the bed of the cart muffles what it can and lies about the rest. The driver clucks again. A wheel that needs grease says nozzily what everyone tries not to. The cart moves because it must, and because you cannot leave it to nights without beadle or searcher. Why do the carts never stop? Start with law. The alderman's order says the dead must be gone by noon or by sunset, depending on whose ordinance outshouts whose conscience. No bodies lying in parish lanes, no bodies kept for wakes that turn into riots, no bodies piled at church doors like theology that ran out of ink. Every ward keeps a cart, and when numbers laugh at men, the ward borrows a second from the next street and debts become rope. Curfew is not scold, it is logistics for corpses. The watch closes posterns so carts can use the wide gate. The reeve nails a board to the bakehouse wall that reads, "Bring out your dead by bell," because letters sometimes rescue breath. Habit learns to move at the sound of wheels, then appetite. Rats dine and you pay. Feral dogs remember the smell of generosity. Fleas decide to be important. The city learns to move flesh fast because the ground refuses to learn calm. Houses board windows as if wood could forget breath. Searchers come with their rods and their vinegar. Watchmen with their bills. Parish beadles with their chalk. Bellmen with their rhymes adapted for certain kinds of politeness. And a set of words that keep neighbors from arguing about grief with shovels. The cart rolls because vermin and rumor rely on delay. You pull delay out of the street like a nail. Then finance. Parishes are engines before they are rosaries. The poor box converts to a cart fund. The watch's lantern fee turns into horn panes for bearers' lamps. Fines for keeping dead too long become bread for the living who will carry them. The clerk needs numbers for the bills of mortality. Without numbers, ships do not berth. Without ships, salt forgets to arrive, and meat learns to be poetry too early. In a plague year, the city's credit lives in a book of dots. Dots require carts. The cart that does not stop is a letter of exchange drawn on a bank that prefers pits to promises, then seasons. Pest does not visit once, it lodges. It rises like heat after harvest and hides in winter when rats run indoors. It returns whenever spring believes in itself more than it ought. Some years it is fever and vomit. Some years swellings that confess with a color you cannot forget. Some years a cough that wouldn't leave a saint alone. Physicians argue from chairs and examine urine in glass that looks like a beautiful lie. Searchers argue from thresholds and name what chairs cannot. The cart cares nothing for diagnosis, it cares for cadence. Lift, lay, roll, pause. Lift, lay, roll, bless if there is a priest standing. Roll anyway if not. Then space. Pits outlive sermons. The trench at the edge of the ward opens with a priest, a beadle, a mason, straw, lime if you can bully delivery, and a clerk who counts while refusing to like the job. When one trench fills, another waits under sod with boards already cut, cord already bought, a second cart already hired. You order the watchboat to sit at the arch and row the bucket cadence because water that keeps its appointments rescues dignity. Bearers tip, straw swallows. A psalm skims, the cart turns, the wheel finds a stone that you will resent until frost heaves it out. There is no day off for east wind or west, then contagion as employment. Not merely plague. Emptiness rejects reuse. Midwives nurse then fall, searchers fall and are replaced, clergy fall, and of those who remain, some stay and count, and some leave and learn to count elsewhere. Bearers become as common as rats, which is a sentence you are ashamed of, until you look at a wheel and hear a child cough. Doors chalk themselves, porches gather soup, pits receive like offices. Rope makes polite what could be chaos. Employment persists after mortality retreats. You cannot dismiss men who learn to save a lane while sweating into their rags. You cannot keep them idle until next summer's rats arrive. The cart keeps them from becoming interesting. Your job is to turn dread into drill. You mark caps and horn on safe porches and ban tallow within 3 hands of doors where searchers will knock. You set lantern height at mouth level where tired eyes cannot avoid rules. You fine in soup, not shame, because soup can be counted and shame cannot. You teach a boy to cap a taper and then make him teach his mother. You put rope on chests and make neighbors tug test at dusk. So rope remembers wrists. You nail the plank at the arch high enough that laziness must read to leave. The cart rolls not because you love doom, but because drill became cheaper than confession. Mid-circuit, while the beadle tallies and the bearers haul, carve one plain law with your thumb and post it under our video so some other ward can borrow it. Write I'd require, with a rule your porch will obey without admiration. Bell at cap height, vinegar jar at door, rope loop on chest, window unbarred on Beadle's day, soup token posted, chalk renewed on Saints' Eves, no sermons longer than soup. Beyond the trench, commerce refuses to stop eating. Carts carry rubble to fill holes made by older plagues. Other carts carry bread from bakehouses pushed beyond the ditch. Other carts carry malt to kilns that now rake chaff into barrels with lids. Your watchboat keeps pace beneath the bridge, hooks ready, horn lamps hooded, oars lifting to the rhythm that keeps the crowd from inventing courage. The bell captain keeps time with her potlids to remind a street that water outruns rumor when it knows where to put its feet. You resent the cart because it is honest. It keeps moving because households still pretend to be fortresses until vinegar and chalk make them porches. It keeps moving because searchers must return to rods that learn new names, because beadles must write dots that turn into permission slips for ships, because priests must confess the ledger as often as they confess sins. It keeps moving because the city's fear is a tether tied to the cart's tailboard. If you stop, fear wanders. If you move, fear becomes work. On a dusk when pity rings louder than bell, you watch the bearers lift a smaller, lighter bundle, and you swear you will burn the cart if it ever lies to you about necessity. The searcher's jaw does not move. The beadle's chalk does, and his hand shakes once and writes correctly anyway. You add an extra ladle of soup to the porch that night and pretend the schedule required it. You tighten the rope loop on your wrist and walk to the church porch to nail a moral short enough to be obeyed. No sermons longer than soup. The sacristan smiles like a man forgiven for something he only thought of doing. Why did plague carts never stop rolling? Because every time you tried to rest them, some other math woke them. Season, ship, sewer, market, rumor. Because in the year after a big dying, hunger learned to undo what lime had taught. Because men with clean hands tried to reopen the counting house before caps had trained wrists. Because the last funeral invented work for the next 3. Because in a city that keeps itself with drills, the only moving thing allowed to be interesting is the cart that makes tragedy cheaper than it would be otherwise. Subscribe and tap the bell while your chalk still tastes like vinegar. Then write continue if you want to ride the cart to the trench and back. Inventory the bearer's kit. Nail ordinances to the rate board where laziness must read to leave. And budget soup like a law that outlives pity. Bring your porch rule. I'll bring horn, rope, chalk, the beadle's dots, the searcher's rod, the sacristan's cap, and a habit worth surviving for, turning dread into furniture that not even a cart can argue with. The cart kneels when you tell it to. Not with courtesy. Axle grease and habit don't do courtesies, but with that useful squawk in the springs that says the bed is as low as it will go and now the lane must pay its debt. Rope first. You slip the loop onto your wrist so your hands remember which job they own. Horn under your cloak throws a calm circle across chalked crosses on door and lintel. First, second, third. And you breathe vinegar through cloth because belief is free, but habits feed children. 1, the beadle says, quill lifted, and the searcher answers with her rod, the tip wet, the date already decided by a chalk stub you want to hate. The bearers slide the hook through linen, lay staves under hooks, lift with boards and breath instead of fingers and hope. The bed accepts with a straw sigh. The driver clucks. The wheel complains about the cobble it always complains about, and the cart rolls, because rope has a better theology than speeches. Before we set off for the trench and the rate board and the one argument lime always wins, do 2 small things that keep these long walks supplied. Subscribe and tap the bell. We add a fresh corridor here every day. And in the comments, tell me 1 ward rule you'd nail by your porch to make this easier on your street. Window unbarred on Beadle's Day. Vinegar jar at door. Rope loop on chest. Horn at mouth height. Chalk renewed Saints' Eves. Kit matters more than courage. You inventory aloud because listing is how dread becomes furniture. Bearers 2 lengths of stout board with holes for iron hooks. 2 hemp cords for wrists, 2 rags soaked in vinegar and tied at the mouth, a lantern with horn and a cap that fits the watchboy's hand, a pair of gloves boiled yesterday and dried by the bakehouse crown, a small ladle, not for soup but for lime, a shovel, a sheet, a short psalm, no longer than a bowl. Beadle, tally book, chalk a nail for when chalk lies, a staff that taps doors twice without turning questions into accidents. Searcher, rod, vinegar jar, courage the size of a parish and exactly as noisy. Driver 3 clucks in a voice the horse believes. Rope, horn, chalk, snuffer, the habit that turns disgust into drill. A boy runs ahead because he knows his job now. Bang the bell at corners so people don't make a crowd big enough to tell a story. Spectators turn into witnesses if you let them. Witnesses turn into rumors. Rumors turn into the next cart. The bell captain keeps time with a pot lid on the porch rail. Not fast, not solemn, just enough to teach feet where to put themselves. 2 lantern boys in yellow sashes chalk fish at the stew door and a circle at the house that keeps water ready. Fish for soup, circle for watched. Hospitality written down where fear would otherwise stage a play. The trench doesn't wait for emotion. Boards already laid across the lip, straw already shaken down, lime barrel already sitting in a sulk like a magistrate, priest already standing without cliché because he learned early that long prayers are worse than bad roads. You wave the bearers into that practiced triangle, bed, lip, straw, and they tip like men who know where their own feet live. Linen slides, straw receives, lime hisses like a truth you can afford. The priest gives the short word you insisted on. No sermons longer than soup, and the beetle marks a dot. Dots become lines. Lines become permission for ships. Permission becomes salt, which becomes pickled herring, which becomes children who ate yesterday. The cart backs, turns, creaks, goes. Back up the lane, the rate board waits, mouth height, horn lit, chalk eager. You print letters large enough to insult laziness. Bring out your dead by bell. Board unbarred on Beatles Day. Vinegar jar at door, rope loop on chest. Horn at mouth height. Chalk renewed Saints' Eves. Soup for fines. Read weekly at porch. No sermons longer than soup. The alderman's nephew hammers 2 nails without showing you his sleeve. You let him win adulthood in silence. The clerk copies the lines into the hall with boredom that smells like virtue. The watchboat bumps the arch twice and hums the bucket cadence, because water learns faster when it is made to keep rhythm. You walk the cart because wheels do not cure dread. Walking turns dread into gig work. At the next house, the searcher meets the same argument she always meets, spoken in 10 accents. Keep him until the cousin comes. Keep her until the child understands. Keep them because the Lord likes vigils. The searcher's rod touches brow and wrist. The vinegar glints. The date on the jam refuses romance. By bell, you say, and the words are not a threat. They are a strap that holds a street together. The bearers lift what you cannot and do not make noble. The mother says something that breaks the board's grammar for a breath. The stew mistress adds a ladle of broth to the porch schedule without talking about it. You write extra in the margin of your little book because alms are either counted or they become regret. Mid-route, because the lane is still teachable while chalk is damp and lime is honest, carve 1 line you would let your children find without you. Drop it in the comments with I'd require and keep it short enough to obey. Bell at cap height, vinegar jar by door, rope loop tested at dusk, window unbarred on Beatles Day, straw shaken before bell. Searchers are the closest thing law has to prophecy. The old woman with the rod smells a house better than most men read a charter. She catches the cough that pretends to be dust and remembers how a boy looked at a door jamb like a psalm. She puts a cross on a shutter you were hoping to walk past. The beetle writes the date with chalk, not ink, because chalk is merciless and visible and embarrasses laziness at eye level. The cart will return here before dusk. That is not tragedy, that is logistics, preventing tragedy's cousin, improvisation. The watch learns to guard the living from their piety. A family wants a wake. You do not say no wake, you say soup at dawn and burial by noon, and the rope loop stays on the chest until the bearers arrive. You let a priest sing the short psalm and order caps over tapers. You put a horn lamp on the trestle so nobody thinks breath is a candle snuffer. You let the old man talk about his father and prevent him from turning regret into gatherings. Grief without buckets is gossip. What else keeps the wheels moving? Guild orders. The sweep beats 4 chimneys by Michaelmas because smoke writes invitations to death. The chandler moves his dipping vat because fat drips always imagine themselves careful. The baker crowns his oven with tile because crevices breed bad ideas when flues remember to forget. The alderman posts horn height for porch lamps so children can boss piety without argument. The sacristan drills cap, cap, cap until a visiting uncle obeys and then pretends he meant to. The stew mistress reads the soup ledger at court and shames coin into ladles and horn panes into porches. A rumor stalks you and you let it think it surprised you. Powder in a yard that loves emperors too loudly, an oiled hinge at a moneylender's shutter, a dice bowl that keeps its sheen too faithfully. All 3 fought your cart in ways your cart cannot answer. You answer with chalk, horn, and rope in turn. Cross on powder doors, circle thick as a ring on money hinges, bowl inverted above the dice table, vinegar on the rim, rope on wrists that prefer the wrong nouns. The alley attempts spectacle. You offer furniture. At the trench again, the shovel makes its dull donation. Lime throws its hiss. Straw takes the news and does not spread it. The priest gives the short word that protected this city better than eloquence. No sermons longer than soup. The beetle turns dots into a week's reckoning. The driver straightens his back without pretending to be noble. The bearers go for water and vinegar instead of a theater that would have scratched their throats into lies. The cart takes the next corner with a complaint even honest wheels have. The bell changes tempo to bucket, and the watchboat answers under the arch. The single best reason these carts never stop is the only one the ballads forget, because pity that stalls becomes cruelty. A lane that keeps the dead because it cannot imagine sun is a lane that teaches rats to argue and dogs to inherit. A ward that lets the beetles' chalk turn into negotiation is a ward that gives ships a reason to refuse its harbor, and then you will bury people who might have eaten pickled herring. A parish that can't turn searcher rods into data cannot persuade a city to buy tile, and a city that cannot make soup for fines into a column cannot keep children alive long enough to forget your name. By the Third Circuit, your shoulders stop trying to be heroes and remember they are rooms. You put rope back on the nail with the calmness of a clerk. You count vinegar jars and write spent without hating the word. You add chalk to your belt and loan it to lantern boys because chalk belongs to alleys, not to books. You list horn panes promised and snuffer rings installed and stew ladles bought with dice you made board. You update the rate board once more, where laziness has to read to leave. Unbarred on Beatles' Day, rope loop tested at dusk, chalk renewed on Saints' Eves, soup column read weekly. You end the day where you should, at the porch with a ladle and a ledger, and the only sentence that should be long in a plague year. 8. The stew mistress reads names into bowls. The clerk counts dots into permission. The sacristan caps the last taper with a practiced smallness you permit yourself to love. The beetle sharpens his chalk with a knife and doesn't apologize. The cart rumbles away from the trench into a sky that isn't sure which season it prefers. It will come back. That is not cynicism. That is how keeping works. Subscribe and tap the bell while your rope is still willing to learn. Then write continue if you want to post the ordinances at mouth height, inventory lime and straw like they were money, budget soup as law not pity, and walk one house where the chalk came too late so we can teach the street how to make that sentence rare. Bring your porch rule. I'll bring horn, rope, chalk, the beetle's dots, the searcher's rod, the bell captain's metronome, and the habit that keeps carts from becoming fables, turning dread into something your hands can pick up and put down without telling a poem about it. The horn throws a warm coin on the rate board, while your chalk learns its manners, and the plank becomes the city's mouth at eye height. You write the dull sentences that keep grief from romantic jobs, bring out by bell, window unbarred on Beatles' Day, vinegar jar at door, rope loop on chest, tug tested at dusk, horn at mouth height, chalk renewed on Saints' Eves, soup for fines, read weekly at porch, no sermons longer than soup. The alderman's nephew hammers without preening. The clerk copies into the hall without adjectives. Lantern boys trace the symbols below. Fish for stew, circle for watched, tick for watch welcome, star for horn proved, cross for powder warned, then run to mark doors before fear decides to perform. You lift your staff and tap each line so memory has something to grab, then turn and face the cart because wood that learns grammar demands you keep rolling the sentence it rescued. Straw and lime become a budget you count like coin. At the trench, the mason measures boards with his palm, the priest with his jaw, the beetle with his dots. Straw goes down first, not because straw is brave, but because dignity needs a pillow. Then lime, not because lime is holy, but because it is faster than rumor. You inventory what the ward owns now that pity had to stop improvising. 3 barrels of lime under lock, 6 boards planed smooth enough to slide linen without insult, 2 coils of rope, 4 pairs of boiled gloves, a psalm short enough to share a bowl. The watchboat bumps the arch twice, and the bell captain answers on her pot lid, and that rhythm tells body and bearers what the city expects. Predictable hands, predictable steps, predictable mercy. Subscribe and tap the bell if you haven't yet. New corridors land daily, and drop a comment with, I'd require. Plus 1 rule you'd nail where tired eyes must brush it. Window unbarred, rope loop tested, vinegar within reach, chalk renewed, soup read aloud. Soup becomes ordinance when the stew mistress reads the ledger on the porch like a psalter. Brush to bowls, 4 ladles. Bowls to horn panes, 3. Notch to snuffer rings, 5. Powder bowl to cap drill, 2 afternoons. Bearer's pay, 8 loaves, 12 onions, a ladle for the widow who washed linen until the rod said stop. The alderman stands in the lane, not on a dais, and signs coin where soup outpaced fines. The clerk writes practice kept because the street kept receipts. Lantern boys chalk double fish where 2 were fed, and everyone pretends not to admire them. You post a placard beside the plank to make the habit, marriage official. Soup for fines, read each market noon. Stew vouchers pinned to board, porch ledgers copied to hall. Nobody cheers. The cart rattles past gently and becomes the applause. You promised the lane you'd walk 1 house where chalk came too late and turn it into furniture. The wake lasted longer than the bell. The barred window made air into conspiracy. A taper kissed a curtain, and the curtain discovered a purpose it shouldn't. The searcher's rod had come and gone. The Beatles' chalk scratched a tremor on the jam. Charity debated theater. Then the boards learned weight without respect. You audit aloud so the room can remember future. Cap, not breath. Bed away from cone. Curtain tied. Window unbarred on Beatles' day. Rope loop on chest at dusk. Vinegar jar by door. Horn at mouth height. You make the ant drill cap, cap, cap until her hands correct her mouth. You make the sun pull the hook to lift a spar from the rafters and back, twice without audience. You ask the sacristan to say the short psalm in the lane, so women can listen and men can haul. You nail no sermons longer than soup above the cone, because grief behaves better when it has instructions. Curfew becomes choreography instead of scold. The cart's rattle sets the time. Lids go on breath, caps on flame, embers into pot, rope loops tug-tested, chalk refreshed, window unbarred where chalk is fresh, doors left only on the latch where Beatles' chalk is old, boys sent to the arch to keep the boats beat. Watch keeps carts from arguments by walking behind, not in front. You post a sideboard under the plank so nobody has to invent decency in a hurry. Cap and lid at bell, rope on chest at dusk, window unbarred, vinegar within reach, horn at mouth height, hook within a hand. The alderman's nephew recites it without a stumble. You forgive him again. Mid-scene, while chops of lime glitter in the lamplight and chalk dust lives under your nail, tell me one more sentence you'd shove under a neighbor's nose when kindness makes them clever. Write I'd require and keep it rude and short. I'll pin the ones that will still be true when the soup pot is quiet. Ship letters steal into the lane because dots made officials brave. A factor from the quay brings a bill of mortality with your ward's numbers and the river's permission. Salt will birth by Sunday if your dot work won. You nod, and the cart's wheel answers by finding a different stone to hate. The sweep beats 4 chimneys per street by Michaelmas because soot writes invitations. The chandler moves his dipping vat because tallow worships accident. The baker tiles crowns because cracks turn into verbs. You copy their duties onto the plank in charcoal so work can travel faster than grief. Sweeps quarter rounds nailed to doors, horn height posted and checked, tile crowns on street ovens, caps drilled at porch. The clerk murmurs that you are turning alleys into charters. You pretend this has only now occurred to you. Lime shortages teach drills too. A man comes grinning with chalk scraped from a wall and calls it lime. Vinegar does not sing, so you seize his shovel and make him mix a pan while you listen for the hiss that pays wages. It does not come. He pays soup for a week and watches the mason slake real lime with respect. The tanner barters chalk for lime because leather needs both truth and cleanliness. You stand between them like a hinge, teaching 2 kinds of dust not to become enemies. The beetle adds a line to the rate board at your shoulder. Lime weighed, slaked under watch, and you underline under watch with a smile you do not explain. Charlatans reappear whenever the cart slows to encourage art. A doctor with saffron under his nail tells the crowd that boiled rosemary makes pits unnecessary. A monk who walked back from someplace warm says the Virgin prefers long psalms. A cousin swears a candle left all night will make angels weigh less. You cap the candle, you shorten the psalm, you buy the rosemary for the vinegar jar and reduce the speech to a line on the plank, no sermons longer than soup. Men grumble that you are reducing mystery. You push the cart until the wheel sings and call that mystery in a tongue the city understands. Bearers recruit because backs give out and wrists forget. You set up a drill in the yard behind the bakehouse, staff through hooks, hooks through linen, boards under hooks, lift with boards, not hands, cord at the wrist, horn in the boy's palm, vinegar in the rag, shovel for lime, psalm shorter than a bowl. Hazard pay becomes a list under the plank: 8 loaves, onions, 2 pence per day, stew twice daily, widow stipend when cords fail. You refuse to make martyrs, you make shifts. You force the alderman to sign a rotation and the beadle to keep names. The clerk writes paid with a thrift that makes envy behave. The house with chalk too late earns a second visit so children can practice without regret. You bring a tiny cart built by boys who wanted to be useful and make them run. Bring out drills from door to porch to trench garden, where no lime waits, only parsley. They laugh because pretend is lighter than pity, and learn because pretending is what practice needs to become culture. The searcher with her rod watches them and keeps her mouth closed a while longer. She dips the rod into vinegar and marks a fresh door, first cross, and the mother behind it opens without rehearsing denial. That is a miracle worth keeping. You nail a final set of budget lines at mouth height, so the city cannot pretend numbers live in clerks only. Straw purchased weekly, lime slaked under watch, boards planed, rope coils dried on pegs, vinegar jars renewed, soup column read, sweeps paid, horn bought, snuffer rings pinned, caps drilled. You tap the plank with your staff so the alley hears the music of invoices. The cart, never far from any sentence worth writing, rattles to the arch and waits for the boat's beat. You walk your rope back onto its nail, lift your horn off the hook, and know the answer to the question that drags this cart through too many streets. Because stopping is crueler than this. Continue if you want to pin ordinances where laziness must brush them to leave, price burial like bread without romance, drill rope on chests at dusk until wrists choose obedience, and audit one more room where pride thought it could out-talk vinegar. Bring your porch rule. I'll bring horn, rope, chalk, lime, straw, the beadle's dots, the searcher's rod, the stew mistress's ledger, and that small metronome that rescues alleys better than saints, the bell that says lids, the ordnance nails dry before the lime does. Mouth height, horn lit, chalk thick enough to shame a passerby into reading, bring out by bell, window unbarred on beadle's day, vinegar jar at door, rope loop on chest, tug tested at dusk, horn at mouth height, chalk renewed on saints' eves, soup for fines, read weekly at porch, sweeps quarter rounds nailed to doors, tile crowns on street ovens, no sermons longer than soup. You tap each line with the ferrule so memory has something to grab. The alderman's nephew hammers the corners without looking for your eyes. You let him have adulthood in silence. Lantern boys in yellow sashes repeat the symbol list. Fish for stew, circle for watched, tick for watch welcome, star for horn proved, cross for powder warned. Until the alley can sign to itself without the watch pronouncing anything. Trench work becomes procurement, not theater. Boards are numbered, ends painted so dull men put dull wood in the right order. Straw is stacked under a tarred cloth you bullied the chandler into lending. Lime barrels are slaked under watch with vinegar at hand for eyes and for honesty. The mason bangs the head of his hammer against each plank so the trench hears someone bothered to listen. The priest stands and does not pretend he invented brevity. The beadle counts dots like he will be forgiven by accuracies. You lay a hand on the cart's bed and it answers with a small wooden shrug that means, when you do your part, I can do mine. The cart rolls, because the street is wealthy in preparedness for once, and wealth like this is allowed to be boring. At the bakehouse porch, the stew mistress reads the week's soup column the way she will read a psalter when she is old. Brush to bowls, 5 ladles. Bowls to horn, 3 panes at shrine. Notch to snuffer rings, 7. Powder bowl to cap drill, 2 eves and a morning. Bearer's pay, 8 loaves, onions, 2 pence, widow stipend as promised. The alderman signs coin into horn and tile and sweep with the caution of a man who has finally learned that popularity burns faster than roofs. The clerk writes practice kept across the board in the board hand you have come to trust, and then, with a glance at you that lasts less than a breath, adds column read. You grant him the sin of pride and the virtue of receipts. House audit, the one whose chalk came late. The wake stole hours. The barred window gave the fever an audience. A taper leaned toward a curtain that wanted story more than shade. You gather the household in the lane and turn regret into furniture. Rope loop on chest, tug test, cap the cone. Tie the curtain back with a ribbon you cut exactly into 2 hands' length, the new measurement that has saved more street than sermons. Window unbarred on Beadle's day. Vinegar jar placed where a tired hand will bump it before a mouth would. Horn lamp nailed at mouth height so a child can boss flame. You make the aunt drill cap, cap, cap at the post until her wrists learn what her mouth forgot. You make the son lift a spar with a hook and lower it twice before the crowd goes away. The priest recites the short word you paid him to learn. Chalk on the lintel fades slower than you want, but you taught a hand to move faster. You cannot legislate weather, but you can budget it. Rain turns pits honest and lanes treacherous. You post a sideboard under the plank where laziness must brush it. Cap and lid at bell, rope loop tested at dusk, window unbarred, vinegar within reach, horn at mouth height, hook within 1 hand, straw shaken before bell. Bearers' hooks get filed, boards get planed, cords get dried on pegs, not under eaves. The boat under the arch keeps bumping the stones exactly once between tides, so men can keep cadence with water instead of with rumors. The bell captain, insufferable, priceless, teaches the bucket beat to 3 boys who meant to quarrel with vinegar and learn to count instead. Because these corridors stay open by your small rituals, pause and reinforce them. Subscribe and tap the bell. We publish a new room daily. And in the comments drop, I'd require. With one rule you'll nail where tired hands cannot dodge it. Window unbarred on Beadle's day. Rope loop tug tested at dusk. Vinegar jar at door. Chalk renewed, horn posted, soup column read aloud. I'll pin the practical lines and cut them onto the ward plank in part 5, so habit outlives fear. The cart finds the corner every wheel hates and makes friends with it. A boy, clever in ways you don't have time for, slips behind and pretends to help. You hand him the rope loop and make him feel what lifting is when it refuses to become a story. He learns. He leaves. Later he will brag that he stood near the trench and the priest. You will be content that he learned to walk backwards without turning. The searcher's rod is a liturgy you can't afford to romanticize. She touches brow, wrist, air above linen. She hears a cough and a lie and counts them both correctly. She marks a first cross on a shutter you hoped wouldn't need it and a second on a jam where you knew it would. She tells you how many beds are argument, how many spoons are survival. She dips her rod in vinegar, not as magic, but as arithmetic. You escort her where paths cross because the alley respects sticks more when watchers stand behind them. She nods once and uses silence like a tool. The beetle never stops counting. Dots fill the bill of mortality. Dots slide into columns, columns into permission slips for ships, permission slips into salt and grain and rope paid for without speeches. When the clerk reads the dots aloud at the alderman's board, you make him place his hand on the plank as well as the page. Mouth height first, ink second. He glares at you the way men glare at their own rescue. He will thank you next winter when a ship docks at the right time. Winter teaches you a new cruelty, honesty by ice. The trench freezes, lime travels slower, wheels complain more fashionably. You ration straw with a bill in your mouth and remember that pity is a bad accountant. You order a second cart from the next ward and pay for it in soup, tile, and horn panes. The alderman bluffs, then learns to sign. The boat gets new hooks and longer oars. The bell captain trains a lad whose wrists are stronger than his voice. He learns to call rhythm anyway. Charlatanry puts on a new mask and arrives with saffron in it. A man who left in summer returns in winter with a story about amulets and kings. He waves a dried herb and swears the rod won't need a jar if windows are shut for a fortnight. You chalk a fish under his door, hand him a ladle, and assign him to read the soup column at the porch. He blushes. He doesn't burn. He stops selling hope when he realizes boredom pays better than admiration. 3 streets over a guild tiles bakehouse crowns and moves ovens beyond the ditch because you took your plank there and nailed nouns where laziness had to brush them. The cart still rolls because people still die, because ship letters still prefer dots to rumors, because a ward that drilled rope at dusk refuses to be shy about noon. But it rattles less like panic and more like keeping. You allow yourself to admire the hinge sound once. A sheaf of ordinances grows in the clerk's hand and does not turn into poetry. Bring out by bell. Window unbarred. Vinegar jar at door. Rope loop on chest. Horn at mouth height. Chalk renewed. Soup red. Sweeps paid. Tile on crowns. Hooks drilled. Dice under horn on saints' eves. Powder out. Cross on doors. No sermons longer than soup. He posts them under the plank and you tap each word with your staff. Tapping is the closest the watch ever gets to blessing. The house that hid its death behind the settle becomes your object lesson at market noon. You walk the cart into the green, because hiding requires drag and ritual hates dark. You lay boards, lay straw, lay linen, lay lime. You lay grief across a rhythm, and nobody is permitted to turn it into a I am. The priest eats after, not before, and has the decency to wash his hands where the alley can see him. The boys run the spoon tap and the boat answers under the arch. The beetle writes a dot you would like never to see again. You still obey your own rules. Tile and horn become inheritance. A woman you never liked admits as much by moving her cap ring down to her child's mouth height and making her drill cap, cap, cap until the little mouth wants to laugh. You do not scold, you count. You add a star to the cloth hall door because horn proved itself when silk flirted with flame again and changed its mind. You strike a cross on a door where sulfur sleeps. You see it the next day, and it's been redrawn darker by a hand you didn't order. That is culture. The cart rattles by the arch, and a dog that likes metronomes thumps its tail to the wheel rhythm. You inventory one more time as if numbers could turn loss into keeping. Boards laid, straw shaken, lime slaked, rope dried, horn cooled, chalk thick, soup reed, sweeps paid, tiles set, caps drilled, bells obeyed, windows unbarred on Beatles Day, rope loops tug tested at dusk. Your shoulders remember 3 seasons worth of lifting and decide to stay available. The wheel hits the stone you keep thinking you will dig out tomorrow. You forgive it and plan to fix it, because that is what watchmen confess in years like this. The miracle is not that the cart stops. It is that it keeps becoming furniture. Drop continue in the comments so I know to push this cart to the rate board and nail the next short sentences at mouth height where laziness must read to leave. Bring your porch rule. I'll bring horn, rope, chalk, lime, straw, the beetle's dots, the searcher's rod, the stew mistress's ledger, and the metronome that rescues alleys in any century. The bell that says lids. The board that priced bread now prices burial, and chalk looks obscene until you remember chalk saves dignity faster than eulogy. Mouth height, horn lit, you print the sentences the ward agreed on at the hall until your wrist burns like a conscience. By bell to trench, free, cart hire beyond ward 1 soup token, bearer's day 8 loaves, onions 2 pence, lime and straw, parish, linen family if able, porch if not, priest psalm short, no fee, searcher's rod, paid in bread. No vigils after bell, window unbarred on Beatles Day, no sermons longer than soup. The alderman's nephew hammers the corners, sober because grief borrowed his face this week. The clerk copies into the hall without adjectives, and then tacks a smaller placard under the rate list that says Ledger read weekly. Horn warms the wood like a vow you can touch. Before we tip the cart and measure the trench and make soup into law without turning it into a performance, do 2 quick things that keep this whole street drilled instead of dramatic. Subscribe and tap the bell. We publish a new room every day. And in the comments, tell me 1 burial rate line you'd nail where tired eyes can't dodge it. Psalm short, no fee. Lime parish, linen family, bearer's pay posted, window unbarred, soup for fines red. You walk the cart because rates only matter if wheels do. The trench lips you in the chest the way hard work always does when it remembers your name. Boards lie in a number the mason can recite in his sleep. Straw shakes like a blanket with better manners than most rooms have. Lime sulks until water tells it a secret. You inventory without ceremony. 4 barrels slaked, 2 to be mixed. 12 boards planed, 3 ropes coiled, 1 psalm shorter than the stew line. The priest stands where he should and has learned to keep his throat small. The beetle's dots count a week's worth of permission for ships. The bearers look like men, not a romance. The driver's horse shifts and accepts a nose pat as wages. You set the bed and say the words the ward taught you to say. Lift, lay, straw, lime, psalm, cover. And they obey because the city has chosen to prefer boring to interesting. Numbers stop being rude when they buy minutes for the living. The stew mistress reads the column on her porch with a ladle rhythm. The bell captain can match with her lids. Brush to bowls paid 14 ladles. Bowls to horn delivered 3 panes. Bearers bread and onions tallied. Searcher paid. Sweep pot filled. Tile crowns ordered. Lime accounted as parish. Widow stipend posted for the woman who washed linen until the rod said stop. The alderman signs soup vouchers for next week as if the page were a quay permit. The clerk chalks column red on the plank because the habitual should be public. Lantern boys chalk double fish on 2 doors because grief taught generosity in those kitchens. Nobody claps. Someone sleeps. Dusk drills rope like a lullaby because muscle doesn't learn by vows. You fix the loop to the chest where it belongs and make neighbors tug test one another at the gate until wrists know which knot is the one they can untie through tears. Children chant the steps you bribed them into liking. Loop, tug, tie, pat. Loop, tug, tie, pat. A mother who resented you last week for chalking her lintel makes her daughter cap the horn lamp at mouth height until the little hand no longer seeks to blow. A father who mocked rope takes the loop because the searcher marked his shutter this morning. He tugs it with a face that finally learned what a city means. The bell captain stands behind them and hums the soporific bucket beat under her breath so bodies practice breathing on purpose. You let a boy borrow your horn for 3 heartbeats and then take it back. He returns it like a promise. The ward court meets in the green, not to scold but to price compassion like bread. 2 bearers plead for oil for the wheel that always finds the cruelest stone. The alderman signs the purchase because he learned last season that axle grease is cheaper than grief. A woman who kept her father too long asks whether her fine can be soup. The stew mistress nods and writes his name into a bowl as if she invented a nicer gospel. The moneyer mumbles that lime costs. The reeve points at the bill of mortality, and at a letter from the quay, and at the bread list for the bearer's day, and at the barrel that will hiss this afternoon. The moneyer stops mumbling. The clerk writes lime parish larger than usual. You add psalm short, no fee larger still. Because plague always puts on another mask when you learn it, you audit a room that thinks it can outtalk vinegar. A barber surgeon kept a body for an anatomy he wanted to teach his apprentices as soon as the beetle's back turned. He is not a monster. He is proud. Pride learned to walk around rules. The searcher's rod found chalk too late. The beetle found a story that tried to make itself teachable. The cart found a door barred from the inside and learned again that rope is a better theologian than grief. You stand the apprentices in the lane with the board, the straw, the lime, the psalm, and you make them participate in furniture. You nail by bell to trench above their bench, and no vigils below it, and no sermons longer than soup over the cone where their lamp will live. The surgeon pays for horn pains at the shrine, and a week's cap drill led by children while he watches without speaking. He learns more in silence than he would have in 3 lectures. Work gets miscounted unless you drill counting. The beetle adds a note to the plank, dots posted, and you make him read them under horn where mothers can argue with his math and where the alderman's nephew cannot pretend they do not weigh more than his sleeve. This week, 9 to trench, 2 from beyond ward, 3 refunded because searchers erred and beetle corrected, bearers paid, lime slaked, soup read, rope drilled, horn checked, chalk renewed. The clerk writes practice kept again, and the lantern boys chalk a star on the cloth hall door because horn height proved itself when silk flirted and lost interest. The sacristan rings cap, cap, cap because his ribs have learned to enjoy obedience mid-circuit while lime steams and rope sleeps against wrists and horn pains make law without singing. Carve one more ordinance that your block would obey without applause. Write I'd require, and finish with a line short enough to obey after bad news. Rope loop on chest at dusk, window unbarred on Beadle's day, vinegar at door, psalm short, soup ledger read, no sermons longer than soup, ships write letters on your plank without knowing you. The bills of mortality go down on one column because the cart did not stop. Permission slips for the quay go up in another because dots do their duty. Salt arrives. Pickled herring becomes households that do not teach hunger to improvise. The bearers eat, and as long as bearers eat, benches don't sing tragedies. You practice being bored with gratitude. A second audit, because diligence and embarrassment are cousins, takes you to a convent that believes rules are for streets. They kept a noblewoman for a wake that began as duty and became defiance. The searcher's rod had been gently dismissed. The beetle's chalk had been quietly washed. You bring the cart into their yard without asking consent. You lay the board, the straw, the linen, the lime. You name the psalm. You hand the rope to the abbess and say, "Loop to chest, tug test at dusk, window unbarred on Beadle's day." She begins to protest. The sacristan, who grew a spine from horn and caps, rings the short beat in the lane. The city answers. The convent learns it belongs to a parish. You nail by bell, not by title, under their porch where visitors read it first. Little economies keep wheels round. The chandler's boy changes the cap rings on posts along the alley because they squeaked, he says. But you pay him because he is practicing the only kind of vanity that doesn't burn. The sweep beats a chimney that no one had remembered because steam had disguised smoke. You hand him soup without ceremony and chalk cord around, kept in letters he can show his father. The baker sets aside a bag of flour for bearers, bread, because the cart rumbled into the green on his daughter's name day and the alley fed and was quiet. You write extra again and smile into your vinegar. The watchboat learns a new mercy at the arch. When the cart comes in too fast, the boat slows it with hooks and an oar because wood tied to water makes better manners of anger. The bell captain teaches the bucket cadence to a crew of men who thought oars were only for pride. They hate her for an hour. Then they love that they row in time with soup being read. A dog who likes metronomes sleeps on the arch and invents calm. Your plank, which has kept its appointments better than 3 physicians, gets one last column because habit needs receipts. Paid lives beside 8 now in your little book. Capped, lidded, drilled, slaked, read, renewed, join the line that began as found and brought. The alley grows a face you can leave without superstition. Horn glows, rope waits, chalk sits, lime hisses, straw moves, soup sings. Dots become letters that become salt, that becomes dinners, that become children, who might forget your name. You end the day under the plank you hammered when numbers first threatened to put songs in charge. You tap each rule again so hands remember before mouths begin. The alderman signs because he has learned to be proud of signatures that buy habits. The clerk chalks a cross for powder and star for horn and double fish where 2 were fed, and then underlines no sermons longer than soup, as if he could teach it to new neighbors by rubbing chalk into wood. The cart rattles away from the trench like a sentence that refuses to become legend. You hang your rope on its nail, cap your horn, set your chalk to sleep, and give the rate board a look that will carry it into next week. Subscribe and tap the bell while your vinegar jar is still on its shelf. Then write. Continue if you want to nail the last ordinances where laziness must brush them to leave, instruct bearers' guilds into rotation instead of grief. Budget lime and soup with less romance and more receipts, and walk the one room that insists on spectacle so we can teach it how to applaud the cart without welcoming it. Bring your rate board line. I'll bring horn, rope, chalk, lime, straw, the beetle's dots, the searcher's rod, the stew mistress's ledger, and the bell that keeps lanes from remembering the wrong songs. The lime barrel sulks on the green until you make it a ledger entry. Staves tight, hoop trued, bung knocked loose under horn, You slake with water in ladles because haste is how lime learns to lie. Steam climbs, straw waits, boards number themselves with chalk because you bullied the mason into marking them last market. You post a smaller placard under the rate board where laziness must brush it to leave, lime perish, boards planed, ropes dried on pegs, straw shaken before bell, dot list read at court, soup column read at porch. The alderman's nephew nails it without looking for your eyes. Good, the cart kneels, rope loop to wrist, horn up, chalk ready, you begin. Rotation turns men into guild instead of rumor. The bearers' names sit on a plank with pegs that travel, not a list that flatters. 4 teams, 2 on, 2 sleeping, shift bells marked by the pot-lid captain's beat. Hazard pay posted in bread, onions, and 2 pence with widow stipend chalked as loudly as rates for tile. You make them drill lifting in the bakehouse yard because bread and bodies share boards. Iron hooks through linen, staves under, lift with boards and legs, not fingers and grief. Every man caps the horn lamp before he touches staves. Every man knots cord to wrist and tug tests until rope remembers wrists. The porter's 2-finger yawn means do it again. He does. You write paid beside his name in your book because pride is safer when it has a receipt. Soup refuses to stay sentimental. Good. The mistress reads the ledger as law until even the alderman leans in. Bearer's bread baked, lime slaked and counted. Notch to snuffer rings, 7 installed. Horn panes for 3 porches taken, 2 fitted. Powder cross painted on 2 doors. Searchers paid in bread. Widow's stipend delivered. Extra ladles given at 2 houses marked late. She smiles without apology when she adds dice bowl to horn because Vice has learned to buy groceries. You clap once into your coat. She doesn't need more. She rings the spoon tap and the pot lid captain answers, and a street that used to love elegy chooses inventory instead. Because these builds stay open by your small drills, pause and do the channel thing that pays for more plank and chalk. Subscribe and tap the bell. We publish a new room daily, and in the comments write I'd require, plus 1 rule you'll hang where tired hands must touch it. Rope loop, tug tested at dusk. Window unbarred on Beatles Day. Vinegar jar kept full. Soup, read weekly. Dot list posted. You audit spectacle before it recruits the wrong saints. The house at the end of the Tanner's Lane keeps candles in windows for comfort, meaning theater. You carry the hook onto the threshold, cap the cones, tie the curtain back with ribbon cut to 2 hands' length, the measurement that has saved more alleys than sermons. Chalk cap, not breath at mouth height, and make the eldest drill capping while naming children she will not bury if she obeys. She weeps, then drills, then laughs, then drills again. The sacristan stands in the lane and gives the brisk psalm that belongs to trenches, not parlors. You nail no vigils after bell over the settle. Her nephew rolls his eyes. The bearer's rope loop on the chest persuades him without adjectives. Beadles keep their faith in dots by reading them out loud. In front of the plank, not in the hall, the clerk recites the week's count. 11 to trench, 7 at bell, 4 late. 2 returned to ward from beyond ditch. 3 errors corrected when rods found breath. Bearers paid, lime slaked, boards planed, soup read, nobody claps. Alphabets do not need applause. You watch a trader from the quay relax by a thumb's width, then scribble a note to his factor about birthing grain by Michaelmas. Dots are ships. Ships are dinners. You tap the plank with your staff so the alley hears it hum. Winter's second syllabus arrives on wheels. Frost seizes the slope to the trench. Wheels seek treachery. You budget sand like grammar, throw under heel, under hub, under habit. Rope runs under the cart to slow a kiss with gravity before gravity falls in love. Lantern boys faces serious as small bells, bang lids at corners so gawkers become carriers or go home. The beetle hauls a barrel lid to throw as a sled under a litter when a stare insists on poetry. He rides it himself for a breath and laughs. You forgive him, because laughter on duty is a hook that found grip. A convent tries to keep a bar on a night with chalk. The abbess cites custom, you cite the plank, window unbarred on Beatles Day. The searcher's rod points to air and to a number nobody in the refectory wanted to be true. You set the board and straw and linen in their cloister walk so the rookery can see discipline. You lay lime like respect. You force 2 novices to cap cones until their wrists remember they belong to a parish. You nail by bell, not title, under their lamp. The abbess glares, then signs for horn. Pride retires to vows, carts keep calendar. You pull a room into compliance with vinegar and arithmetic. A barber has kept a body for anatomy. He is not a villain. He is a man who thinks teaching excuses timing. You make his apprentices carry the board to the trench while the cart waits. You lay straw and linen and lime while the priest recites the short word you bought him last summer. You hang by bell to trench, and no sermons longer than soup over the cone at his bench. You find him in horn pains for the shrine and a week of cap drill he must supervise without inventing elegy. He learns, or he leaves. Either outcome feeds the ward. The pest house out beyond the ditch teaches patience that bookkeeping cannot. You bring vinegar and rope and horn height to the porch, where rods keep order instead of awe. A girl with swellings smiles at you like a clerk's mercy. You cap her lamp, you drill her friend, you mark a star on the post because horn proved itself here, where tired hands own tools like theology. The master of the house asks for more straw and lime. You sign for both, because lime is cheaper than a street that pretends it loves wakes. You name the porch to the stew mistress and she writes 2 fish beside it. Soup will walk farther than pity. Because habit wants receipts, you budget lime as if it were coin. The rate board gets a column. Lime in 2 barrels, slaked 1, used 1, on order 2. Paid parish, straw shaken, boards planed, ropes dried, soup red. The alderman signs because he wants ships. The clerk underlines because he wants tables to behave. The beadle bangs the head of his staff against the ortet of the plank, so wooden men remember who knocks. You like wood. It keeps secrets only until chalk insists. Carts roll to the countryside when city pits threaten to teach the wrong lesson. You ride 1 out under horn, rope loop on your wrist, because wrists must remember everywhere. In the hamlet, you nail the same nouns to a new post where laziness must read to leave. Bring by bell, window unbarred, vinegar jar at door, rope loop on chest, soup for fines, rod paid in bread, no sermons longer than soup. They call you rude, you call yourself a lender of drills. They accept, because they smelled their own windows last week, and knew chalk was late. You leave 2 horn panes at the chapel, and make the children cap them twice before you let them sing. Charlatans crumble reliably under soup. One arrives with a saffron phylactery and a story about a pilgrim's shoulder bone that cures houses of dots. You buy the saffron with dice bowl fine and throw it into vinegar at the porch and ladle the jar into the pest house cart. He watches. He volunteers to read the soup column on Saints' Eves. He loses the taste for prophecy and learns the taste of schedule. That is how cities hire truth by the hour. You stop a play before its first line, a wake that practice turned into spectacle. Candles ring a bed, curtains lean, the cousin sighs, the beadle's chalk had been sanded thin. You cap cones, you tie curtains 2 hands from breath, you lift with boards, not hands. You order a psalm shorter than a bowl, you point at no vigils after bell. The cousin complains. The alley answers with soup measured and rope drilled and horn cones capped by children while mothers watch without crying. You write lidded again. Your book doesn't apologize. Because these long walks depend on your small additions, write 1 more into our borrowed plank. Subscribe and tap the bell. We keep adding rooms, and in the comments put "I'd require" and name a rule short enough to survive anger. Rope loop tested at dusk, window unbarred on Beatles Day, soup column read weekly, dots posted, lime slaked under watch, no sermons longer than soup. I will pin the ones that smell like work and last longer than pity. The cart kneels again and you love it for being honest. Hook through linen, staves under, straw, lime. The short word, a dot, a ladle. A line on the plank that turns into ships that turn into dinners that turn into bearers who can lift again tomorrow. The priest washes his hands where the alley can see him. The beadle lays chalk near the rate board for lantern boys to renew fishes in circles because symbols need maintenance. The sacristan rings cap, cap, cap for children who just learned grief is more manageable than fear. The alderman's nephew carries lime because lime respects those who carry it. The clerk writes practice kept and does not look at you to be thanked. You leave the lane with rope dry, horn cool, chalk thick, lime counted, straw shaken, boards planed, soup read, and dots posted. The cart rattles away from the trench like a sentence with no appetite for songs. The bell captain hums the bucket cadence under her breath, and the dog that likes metronomes settles. The rate board looks like furniture. The alley smells like vinegar and wood and good bread. You write paid, capped, lidded, slaked, read, renewed, and close the book. The next part of the city will need the same nouns hammered where laziness must brush them to leave. Continue if you want to nail the very last ordinances where even grief must obey. Set the bearer's guild charter so wrists get rest, price lime and straw like coin instead of tails, and walk with the cart on a day when ice thinks it can make poetry of pits, and you oblige it to become accounting. Bring your porch rule. I'll bring horn, rope, chalk, lime, straw, the beetle's dots, the searcher's rod, the stew mistress's ledger, and the one metronome that keeps alleys civilized, the bell that means lids. Ice turns the green to glass and dares your wheels to make poetry. You don't. You reach for sand, not adjectives. The cart noses the slope, the horse listens for your rope, and the bearers learn a new metronome. Push, step, check, lean. Boards that behaved last week skate stupid until you rough them with ash. Lime sulks, you slake it slower because winter rewards people who count. You lay straw like you're betting a proverb, down first because dignity still deserves a pillow, even when frost thinks it has a vote. The priest tests the board with his boot before he tests his psalm with his mouth. The beadle bangs the head of his staff on a plank so wood remembers to be furniture, not theater. You throw sand under axle and heel, loop rope through the cart bed as if winter were a hooked fish, and tell your wrists to behave like rooms before the wheel answers with that small mercy it learned in Michaelmas. Subscribe and tap the bell. We publish a new corridor here every day, and in the comments leave the one lintel law you'd nail where tired hands will have to touch it. Rope loop on chest at dusk, window unbarred on Beatles Day, vinegar jar at door, soup ledger read each week. No sermons longer than soup. I'll pin the ones that still work when ice tries to make pits into poems. Bearers Guild becomes charter today, not rumor. The plank you drilled into them all winter gets written with ink you can audit. 4 crews, 2 on, 2 sleeping. Shifts by bell, first to bell, second to dusk, third to lantern. Pay posted, 2 pence, 8 loaves, onions. Hazard, vinegar gloves, lime ladle. Widow stipend nailed on the same board as fees. Relief clause when wrists lie. Black stripe at sleeve for a week when the rod touches a door and you don't reach it fast enough. Lifting remains furniture. Staff through hooks, hooks through linen, staves under hooks, feet wide, boards steady, rope on wrist, horn capped before hands approach the bed. The alderman signs because his signature now means coin, not applause. The clerk writes practice kept next to paid because wages remembered make better men than legends. The bearers grin under their vinegar rags as if boredom were a feast, and in a way it is. The rate board takes winter into its grammar without complaining. Ice practice, sand under axle and heel, rope through bed, boards roughened, straw shaken, lime slaked slow, pit lips swept, bell kept in bucket cadence. You tap each line until the alderman's nephew can recite them in his sleep, and then you make him throw sand under the cart so his sleeves become useful. Lantern boys chalk stars at doors whose horn proved itself under wind. They chalk crosses on powder doors again because frost turns men clever when they would do better being obedient. The sacristan drills cap, cap, cap by the porch even when his breath bites. The children laugh and obey. A visiting uncle suffers grace. You walk a house where chalk arrived on time and pride still tried to speak. A father had barred the window to keep out envy. You point at the plank. Window unbarred on Beatles Day. He grunts and pulls the bar. You set the rope loop on the chest and make him tug test it while his son counts loud enough to make memory win. Curtain tied 2 hands from breath, cone capped at mouth height, vinegar jar kept near the latch, not on a shelf where theory prefers it. The searcher's rod taps the lintel, first cross not second, and the woman does not argue. You mark a fish under their door on your way out. because stew will be required. You mark a circle because they left the window unbarred without sulking. Soup writes culture faster than grief. The mistress reads at the porch with her ladle like an abacus. Brush to bowls, 6 ladles. Bowls to horn, 5 panes, 2 at shrine, 3 at porches that had tapers. Bearers bread, 8 loaves, onions, a jug of small beer. Searchers, bread and vinegar. Lime, slaked, counted, paid parish. Widow stipend, 2 this week, 1 paid forward by the dice house. Extra ladles at the house marked late. The alderman signs because habit owns him now. The clerk chalks column read because receipts rescue ship letters. The beggar king points at the plank until men remember they like rules that fit into bowls. You do not clap. You make a boy read the board aloud so his wrists will learn to obey chalk faster than rumor. The cart behaves the way carts do when ice thinks itself a poet. Rope under bed, sand under wheel, horn capped when wind finds bright ideas. You have a lid for the lime barrel today because you listened to the mason in autumn. You have an extra board because you learned to be rude to optimism. You have vinegar for eyes you have already warned twice. The pit lip bites less hard when straw chooses to be humble. The priest says the short word you bought him in July, and you forgive him for his larger ones in spring. The bearers open their shoulders, not their throats. The beadle counts dots. The clerk's board hears the pencil scratch like a quiet law. Dots become letters. Letters birth ships. Ships deliver salt. Salt becomes dinners that become mornings where rope can be drilled without calling itself courage, because planks become export when you keep your own promises. You carry this winter grammar to a hamlet that still writes elegies. You nail nouns where laziness must brush them to leave. Bring by bell. Window unbarred, vinegar jar kept. Rope loop on chest, soup ledger read. Sweep quarter rounds, horn at mouth height, no sermons longer than soup. You drill rope with boys until they giggle. You make their mothers cap cones until pride behaves. You put the priest where your plank says he belongs, and tell him to learn the short psalm before he tries again to like his voice. He bows because caps have already rescued his rafters twice. A surgeon in the next ward tries to begin a theater with a body that wasn't his to keep. You have him carry the board to the trench. You have his apprentices lay straw and linen and lime. You nail by bell over his bench and no vigils beside. You find him in horn panes and cap drill led by children when he would rather have lectured. You make him listen to soup being read without offering commentary. He becomes better, or he leaves. Either feeds the city. The convent that signed for horn last part learns to pay receipts with rope. The abbess drills tug test at dusk with novices who have begun to respect sleeves. By bell, not title, you point again, and she points at the window she unbarred and tells you to stop showing off. You smirk and mark a star at their porch. The sacristan laughs without sin. The boys chalk 2 fish for stew, where doctrine finally made room for dinner. Bearers Guild posts the rotation in 3 wards, and boredom earns a reputation. Men who used to love nights for their lies now love schedules for their mercy. You pay them with bread and onions and coin you can count. You refuse to buy their reputations. You buy their shifts. You hang vinegar where ropes sleep. You hang rope where wrists remember. You hang horn where laziness must read it to leave. The bell captain teaches her beat to a boy who turns it into an old song ripened by ice. You allow him his private victory. Because ice finds new angles for pride, you hand the clerk a second chalk, ice discipline. He writes it under the rate board where laziness must bruise, shovel sand to lip, rope through bed, boards roughened, straw shaken, lime slaked slow, bell kept to bucket, boat under arch, psalm short, no sermons longer than soup. He underlines no sermons as if he invented it. Let him. Public lies are too expensive. Let private pride pay for lamps. A charlatan returns with dice shaved smaller and bowl greased finer and saffron under his nail, and a whisper that he knows a map out of winter. You let vinegar talk to the rim. You let rope talk to wrists. You let soup talk to his appetite. He reads the column at the porch next market with a voice that stops wanting to be believed and starts wanting to be accurate. The house that hanged a tapestry over a shutter because it liked romance becomes an object lesson after frost. You hook the tapestry down before the cart teaches it a better verb. You nail rope on chest at mouth height. You tie the curtain back with ribbon. You cap the cones. You make the aunt drill. You mark a fish. You leave. They resent you for a night and then bring a bucket without being begged. That is worth more than your reputation. Winter's last exam arrives at dusk with ice on the lip, a board that wants to buckle, a bearer who wants to swear, and a priest who remembers his throat is not a river. Straw moves, lime hisses, rope holds, horn behaves, chalk keeps its promises. The dot lands on the clerk's board. The stew mistress reads the column without flinching. The beetle knocks the plank so wood continues to be law. The cart turns the corner. The wheel finds the same stone you have promised yourself to pry out tomorrow. You forgive it again, because forgiveness is cheaper than forgetting your tools. Why did plague carts never stop rolling? Because plague never stopped recruiting accomplices. Calendar, kitchen, powder, vanity, rumor, ice. Because the only mercy that pays is scheduled. Because dots become letters, become ships, become dinners, become bearers who can lift again tomorrow. Because grief that pauses becomes gossip. Because you chose rope over romance, horn over tallow, chalk over rhetoric, soup over sermons, and boredom over tragedy. Because alleys that want to live need a cart that keeps its appointments. This is where you put the book away without pretending you were a hero. Rope on nail, horn cool, chalk thick, lime counted, straw shaken, soup read, caps drilled, sweeps paid, dots posted. You stand under the plank and tap each line once more so hands will remember before mouths begin. The alderman signs because he has learned to prefer signatures that buy habits. The clerk scratches practice kept and closes his board because the stew line is calling him by name. The bell captain hums the bucket beat. The dog whose ribs love metronomes lies down where the cart likes to pause. The alley exhale smells like vinegar and wood and bread and sanity. Subscribe and tap the bell so the next series lands while your lintel law is still fresh. In the comments, nail your one-line rule, the sentence you'll actually hang where tired hands will have to touch it. And tell me the next title you want rated for drills. How parish bells outran gossip. Why city walls ate generals. What market stalls taught ministers. We'll shoulder the plank under a new arch, write nouns where laziness must read to leave, and make another corridor survive the way this one did, not with miracles, but with receipts.